fabulous Amy Visser. And Amy's presentation is on, let me just find it, Out of Tune, Perceptions of and Engagement with Mental Health Interventions by Professional Contemporary Musicians, a scoping review. Take it away, Amy.
Thank you so much, Craig. And thank you to the two wonderful speakers prior. Very tough act to follow. I am a relatively new postgrad. The paper I'm actually presenting today it was a requirement for one of my master's unit. I'm doing a master's in mental health, and I started that in February part-time online. So I'm about a third of the way through it at the moment. It was originally written as a critical literature review. However, I'm currently in the process of reworking the paper for publication with a couple of research colleagues within the university. I feel very lucky in that respect. So what I'm going to be presenting today is basically more in line with that scoping review, but bearing in mind that it's still a work in progress. So I'm just going to share my presentation screen, if I can get that to happen. Okay. So before I begin, obviously I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the land of the Awabakal people, and to give thanks to elders past, present and emerging for their care and ownership of this beautiful country that I live on. I'm in Lake Macquarie, which is just south of Newcastle. I thought I would begin today by very briefly just giving you a little bit of information about me, because it kind of puts the paper in context. So academically, my background is psychology. I graduated with honours at University of Newcastle in 2005, a long time ago. But rather than pursuing clinical interests, I went into the world of mental health promotion and prevention. And I worked for over 13 years for an organisation called Everymind. And I was involved in a number of projects and programs at various levels, national, state, community, working with a variety of what we call gatekeeper sectors. So, for example, education, mass media, small business, and just the community more generally on projects that promote mental well-being and prevent mental ill health and suicide. And while all of that was happening, meanwhile, I've also had a 20-year experience working in the performing arts, predominantly in the music industry, but also a little bit in the theatre. I studied classical piano, guitar, violin, acting and drama all through school and university, and I worked in bands from the age of about 13, and have been lucky enough to continue to have a very fruitful music career as an independent singer-songwriter and a musician for hire. But I'm always looking for ways to bring my passions for the arts and mental health together. And I'm particularly passionate about finding ways to better support the mental well-being of our creative community. So I'm currently a board member for Listen Up Music, which is a music and mental health charity. I'm also an ambassador for them. I'm also an ambassador for Entertainment Assist, which is an entertainment industry mental health charity. And Entertainment Assist were responsible for the release of some really key research in 2016 around the status of the mental well-being of the Australian entertainment industry. It was kind of a first of its kind study, and that has triggered a whole range of initiatives, and has gained a lot of media attention as well. So I'm really interested in building on that research and basically in just advocating for kind of industry-wide cultural change. So just before I dive into the why of this, I wanted to just very quickly clarify the who. So in this paper, we talk about what we call professional popular musicians. We've used this terminology because popular musician is kind of a widely used term. And it's basically just to differentiate from people in the kind of classical or symphonic realm of music. Not to be confused with the pop genre, which is more specific again. Popular music is basically just any of those genres, like pop, rock, metal, jazz, anything else you can think of, alternative hip hop, and all their subgenres, anything that's just not classical music. And in terms of when we're thinking about professional musicians, I guess we're kind of talking about anybody that's made a career out of music, whether that's as a performer, a writer, a producer, etc., and working at basically any level, whether they're emerging, established, full-time, part-time, freelance, whatever. So we use this definition because it's pretty widely accepted, and it's the same definition that's been used in a lot of the more recent peer-reviewed research in this area. So why are we interested in the mental health of musicians? Well, it's no secret that professional musicians more broadly often experience negative mental health outcomes. Things like psychological distress, substance use problems, suicidality, but the research more recently has really supported that this is occurring at rates that are higher than the general population. So there are thought to be a number of associated occupational risks, things like just the precarity of doing freelance and contract work and all of the associated kind of job and financial insecurity that that brings. A lot of environmental stuff, so working in isolation, working really unhealthy or unusual hours, exposure to alcohol and other substances, just to name a few. So further to this, when we're talking about the popular music cohort, there's also these kind of added pressures of the ever-changing role of the artist and all of the associated demands for kind of broader professional skills that are outside of creativity and musicianship. So things like tour management, promoting and networking, and all the kind of technical and administrative and business skills that have to be kept up to date. So there's a lot of pressure on these individuals. So despite the fact that we know that there's this kind of mounting evidence for the problem, there remains very little peer-reviewed research around strategies to actually address it. So we're really good at identifying it. We're not very good at talking about how we solve the problem. And although there've been a lot of kind of initiatives popping up globally over the last 10 years, and I guess even more so, it's been highlighted in this last 12 months, there's been a lot more focus on the mental health of musicians. The research isn't really reflecting it. So that we're seeing this kind of, the research is basically out of tune with the reality. And so that's how I developed my research question. So the question was, how do professional adult musicians working in a popular music context perceive, engage with, and or respond to mental health interventions? So I'm going to go through this very quickly because I know time is very limited, but if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer at the end. Basically, in terms of the actual search, there were no date limiters placed on there because the search terms were quite specific. And I know that there's a general kind of paucity of research pertaining to this issue in particular. So I wanted to really cast a wide net. So the only things that we really screened were scholarly articles. So they had to be peer-reviewed articles in English language. We did not include secondary and grey literature sources, which I acknowledge is a limitation of this particular review, but that's just how it happened in the context of me writing this for my master's. So basically the inclusion criteria were any type of study design, qualitative, quantitative, mixed method, adults working in the popular music industry, had to talk about mental health interventions. The things that we excluded were studies that explored music therapy because obviously that's looking at the impact of music on people's well-being, whereas we're kind of interested in the mental health of the people who are making the music. Studies that focused specifically on music performance anxiety, which is kind of a whole other area of study unto itself and is a little bit different to this kind of generalized anxiety that we're interested in. We didn't include studies that focused on people working in classical and symphonic music settings, or studies that included working with students or amateur or hobbyist musicians, because we really kind of wanted to focus on these career musicians. We had a fairly decent sized yield, but as you can see, many of those didn't fit the inclusion criteria. So they either weren't specifically about professional popular musicians, they weren't specifically about mental well-being, or they didn't specifically have data that was related to perceptions of or outcomes from mental health interventions. So with a bit of reference list searching, we ended up with a total of 6 articles. These 6 articles were really widely varied. I've listed them there. I'm not going to go through them individually, don't worry. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. As you can see, there were 4 studies from the States, 1 from Norway, 1 from the UK, really big variety of study designs. So we had one non-randomized control trial, a couple of phenomenological studies, some cross-sectional studies, one case study. Some of them looked at bespoke interventions. So, for example, the New York study looked at a bespoke clinic for jazz musicians who had a substance abuse problem. Also, I think the Berg study, which was conducted in Texas, looked at a bespoke referral service for musicians. But some of the other studies were more general. So, for example, the Norwegian study looked at the responses to psychotherapy and medications more generally, and actually compared them to the general workforce. That was a much larger study and more recent. So yeah, a lot of variation there, and also, as you can see, conducted over quite a long time period. I've gone back too far. Yeah, the earliest study being 1961. So obviously there are some issues around what we take from those studies. So I'm just going to dive straight into some of the key themes. One of the dominant themes was this idea that popular musicians obviously have a range of unique characteristics in terms of their occupation, but also in terms of their kind of personality factors and behaviors. And some of that, potentially could be strengths that can be drawn on from an intervention perspective. So, for example, some of the studies mention positive traits like openness to experience or emotional regulation, problem-solving skills. There are also some protective factors that came up. So things like high rates of job satisfaction, strong working relationships, and some other kind of interesting coping strategies and stuff around humor and exercise as well. So they're things that can be tapped into from an intervention perspective. Also some reported perceived benefits from various different models. So CBT was seen as a beneficial. Some types of self-psychology medication for some people found that quite beneficial. And there was also a lot of discussion around this idea of kind of non-clinical support, particularly around industry peers. So I guess the only problem with those things that were identified as beneficial is that in some of the studies, there was some indication that maybe either those interventions are not easily accessible or they're not quite the right fit. So there was a lot of focus on this kind of wanting something that is tailored, but also coming from somebody who has an understanding of this person's unique needs and challenges. Obviously, there were some maladaptive coping strategies that came out of these studies as well that were identified. So things like substance use, for example. Another key theme were some of the barriers to treatment. And this first one, there's still, and I'm not going to go into detail about, and I'm not going to have a discussion about, the links between creativity and symptoms of mental ill health. It's a whole other area of study. The jury is still kind of out either way. But regardless of whether it's a thing, there's still a stigma. There's a perceived kind of link for people who are working in this industry. So there's this worry that if they are treating their mental health problem, that it might somehow stop them from being able to tap into that part of their creativity. And also related to stigma, I guess, is this fear of job loss as a result of talking about their mental health problem. So they were some of the barriers. And also another key theme was this actual research gap that exists. So this keeps coming up in the research that exists, that there isn't enough research, basically, that there's a lot of talk about what the problems are and not enough talk about, not enough data around what actually works. And so therefore it's difficult to develop any kind of evidence-based practice. So there's this need for further investigation of various different types of interventions, whether that's psychotherapeutic models or psychoeducation problems like mental health literacy, or some peer kind of support programs. And also just generally some public health awareness around this particular issue, because there's still a lot of misconceptions about what the lifestyle of a musician actually looks like. So that was something that came up as well. So just in summary on that, considering, there's a need to consider this population as basically as a distinct group with unique needs. There's a paucity of peer-reviewed research on what actually works. There's some recommendations around strengths-based approaches. So looking at some of those potentially, strong positive coping mechanisms or individual characteristics that can be tapped into and how we can kind of leverage those. Definitely a strong preference for more tailored approaches. And this is in terms of not just the content and the understanding around the issues, but also just the accessibility for people working unusual hours or people who might not be very financially secure. How do we make those interventions more accessible, more affordable? Also, yeah, this importance of non-clinical support. So how do we increase peer-to-peer support and increased awareness in the general population? Based on those findings, there are some recommendations that I've put into the paper. Basically, we need to investigate the effectiveness and meaningfulness of tailored, accessible interventions that cater to the unique challenges of musicians. We need to take into considerations also the demands of the modern musician. So the fact that this industry is very rapidly evolving and there are new sources of stress coming along, but also that we need to draw on, some of those positive methods of coping. It would be great to explore a variety of different interventions, as I mentioned before, whether they're clinical, whether they're psychoeducational or peer-to-peer, and also just building on the research, looking at a variety of different studies designs would be ideal. So I've put, if anybody wants to know more about the work that I do, I've put a couple of my links up there. If you just want to have a listen to some music, you're welcome to do that as well. But that's all from me. Thanks very much.
Look, thanks very much, Amy. That was fantastic. My own background's in experimental clinical psychology and community development. So I really, really like projects like this one. Look, I've got a few questions of my own, but I'd rather throw it to the floor first. So are there any questions for Amy from the audience?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Amy, I'm coming from complete ignorance of your area, except I like music. Musicians of the type you're talking about, they're unusual people, one, because a lot of them are very, very creative, correct?
Yes.
And artists and poets and sculptors are creative people and maybe on the edge to some extent too. Is that correct? And secondly, these are people who get up in front of hundreds or thousands of people and basically expose themselves, their emotions and their voice and everything. So this is a very unusual type of person, isn't it?
Well, I would argue, yes, definitely. Yeah, it's unlike, I guess, it's unlike a lot of professions where you really are your product or your, yeah, a lot of it is you sharing some of the deepest parts of yourself. So it's definitely unique in that sense. And I guess when it comes to, addressing these issues, we have to be mindful of that. But I mean, I think that's what has come up in some of the research is this this idea that maybe musicians or other creatives are more in tune with their emotions in that sense. So is there a way that we can use that from an intervention perspective?
Okay, and where does the drug use come into that?
In terms of
my understanding, and I may be wrong, is that in that world, there's a lot of people use drugs, recreational drugs. I don't know if that's true or not. Stop me if it's not
yeah,
true.
it's that's a common conception. I couldn't tell you, I couldn't give you any specific data on that. I think there's a lot of, it's one of those rare jobs where you can actually access alcohol and other substances while you're working quite easily. So that's an issue. But yeah, I can't tell you the exact numbers, but I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit skewed negatively. Like, you know, as somebody who has anecdotally worked in the industry for a long time, um, you know, I've seen people who have issues with substance use, but probably no more than in the general population of people that I know. Sample of one here, so you know, I can't really argue a case, but yeah, I'm not sure is the answer.
Okay, I'm just interested in creativity in general, and that's a large part of your area, I think.
Yeah, and look, it's something that comes up all the time when we have these discussions, is people are really interested in this idea of the kind of the tortured artist who is struggling all the time with their own mind, because it's a romantic kind of notion, I suppose. And I know that there has been a lot of research done in that area. I'm not across all of it, but I know that it's not, yeah, the jury's out pretty much. I like to think when people bring this up, you know, I like to think that in order to be creative, in order to be able to kind of, yeah, have some output, you have to be able to process those emotions to a degree. And I think people who are kind of in the deep throes of mental illness, it can be hard to even get out of bed, let alone, you know, sit there and create a song or an artwork. So I think, yeah, I think there are a lot of benefits to, yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess I don't know that it's necessarily, these problems don't equal creativity.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks for the question.
So Megan, is that you putting up your hand?
Yes, I've got my hand up.
Yeah, go
Hi,
for it.
Megan.
Hi, Amy. Excellent presentation. You verbalized the whole scoping review paper really, really well. I would highly suggest that you get the recording for this and use it to refine sections of the paper in ways, because you really explain it so well.
Yeah.
So well. And you could
you.
actually use that, the recording verbiage that you used inside the paper to explain sections so well. I was just like blown away by that. My question is about the secondary and grey literature. What is your opinion on what we might find if we did redo the literature search and did access those?
I think I'd be interested to see what we could get out of the evaluation data from some of the programs that exist around this at the moment, because I know that there has been more focus on, particularly around sort of mental health education programs or mental health literacy for this population. I'm actually involved in some work at the moment where we're developing programs for people. So, you know, I know that some of it exists out there, but it would be a matter of, I guess, trying to find it. But I think it would be informative at least. Yeah.
I think so too. I think that would be really good. Excellent.
But I guess the whole point though is that, you know, by doing this paper, it's just shown me that the actual peer-reviewed literature which is what, you know, the gold standard that everybody looks to, it's not telling us anything. And we need to increase it. We need to improve it. So this is just a really good way of highlighting that.
Yeah. And this is exactly what I mean about using the words that you're using in this recording. That would be an excellent line to put, like, in that implications future research section. Like, everything that you express is done so well.
Yeah,
so well.
And yet there's so much scope there available for you to shape this as a project too. So my question, I suppose, was how are you planning to take that forward? Because, for instance, I mean, the community development person in me sees a wonderful community development opportunity here, potentially with the music industry, the industry bodies and so on, to help work with musicians so they're less reluctant to engage, perhaps, to de-demonize it. And provide reassurance, to actually champion the research into particular program approaches and all that sort of stuff. On the other hand, there's perhaps a need to survey more musicians themselves about how what their issues are, how they see issues around engagement and all that. So there's just so much.
I can tell you, like the amount of surveys that I've completed in the last 12 months, particularly because of COVID, around, you know, how is your mental health tracking as a musician? There's been so much happening, but they never really ask that question of what can be done better, or what do you want to see change in order to address this. They're still asking the same questions that they've been asking since the 60s, you know. So
you got access to that data?
I don't, unfortunately.
Because there you go. There's some secondary research data that you can, there's some secondary analysis on, as well as your own originals.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you see that there is an important role, I suppose, for the industry associations in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a lot of goodwill out there, and I think the industry in particular has really done well to focus on this issue a lot more recently, just because of all the additional pressures that have happened in this last 12 months. Obviously, there's a lot of people in my sector out of work who've been really, you know, negatively impacted in a bad way. We were one of the first industries to go down, and we'll probably be one of the last to stand back up again. So,
and I think there's been a lot of attention paid to in the media, and a lot of public sympathy for the situations faced by all sorts of artists, not just musicians, but everyone in the arts, the creative arts industry. So, I mean, you know, there's good ability to leverage off that, I suppose, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another reason why this kind of peer review, this evidence-based stuff is so important is because when it comes to funding for projects like this, for example, if you're looking at federal government funding, you know, they always go back to what does the evidence say? And particularly now after the Productivity Commission report, it's all about, you know, how can you prove that there is a need there? And so that's what I want to contribute to be able to show that that need is real, and to give some really solid recommendations. So when it comes to funding, you know, there's no questions asked.
Can I ask you then, does that feel slightly intimidating, having that? Imagine yourself, you're a Star Trekker across the knowledge universe, and there's all this unanswered question out there for you to pick and choose. Does that overwhelm you or intimidate you in any way?
Yeah.
Well, that's normal.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Look, I don't even know. I'm so interested in research on this, you know, subject in particular, but I'm also very divided, because I want to be proactive. I want to be out there actually doing the work. I want to be the recipient of the work. I kind of want to wear all the hats, and, you know, do a master's degree at the same time. So, yeah.
Is this a master's project?
It was actually it was a critical literature review. That was the the initial,
Oh, well, I know what my next question, you know, surely must be. I asked this of Gurmeet last year. So you intend to take this forward into a PhD project, do you?
I would love to, but I'm not sure how I'm going to make that work at the moment. I would definitely.
Well, you got to
do
get
that,
the master's bit done first. But,
yes.
But I think it would make a wonderful PhD project, really. And you sound like you have such poise and confidence, you know, as yourself as positioned in that industry and aware of the issues, and you know, really good supervision. I reckon it's a ripper of a project.
The trick would be finding a supervisor that specialises in what Amy is.
I think good supervision is always part of the problem, but, you know, I think depending on how you want to pitch it, as a therapeutic exercise or as a community development exercise, you know, supervisors there will help you shape a direction, I think.
If it's a psychology-based one, we could definitely find people if you wanted to go down that line.
Well,
yeah, I'm very open to suggestion, because this is all very new to me. All I know is that I'm really passionate about it and I want to make a difference. So I'm more than happy to take guidance on any of that.
And Amy, you're very good at writing. Like, you were picked out of many masters critical literature reviews to publish. like you're one of the only ones that got picked. And it's because you write so well already. So you definitely got the skills needed to do a PhD by far.
And this university also have a very notable school of contemporary music as well. So
That's true.
I think, you know, you could find some supervision support in there as well, potentially.
Yeah, great.
So many possibilities.
Indeed. Think big.
And you'll already have a publication under your belt, Amy.
Oh, well, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Which means you'll be very competitive for a scholarship.
Yeah.
You get paid to do it.
Look, you know, I wish you all the best with that project,
Thank you.
Amy, and I hope you'll be coming back, you know, with a bigger project to entertain us all with next year.
Thank you.
So I suppose we've got time for one or two more quick questions. Have we got any more questions from the audience? Or
Sure. I think there was one from Sophia, but she had to run off.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, look, all of us, you know, well done. I think for a master's project, that's amazing. And I think, you know, we all wish you well on your journey towards PhD with a bit of luck. So, look, thanks very much for joining us, Amy. And it's been good to meet you at conference.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you to the other amazing speakers as well. So much interesting work happening.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's the job I should have done. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Part of the wrap up. So, and don't forget to join us, everyone. There's a final session, a plenary session, if you like, at 5:15. It's really just an informal, you know, bring a drink or a cup of coffee or something like that. And we can have a bit of a debrief together about what worked well and what didn't, and, you know, just socialise and all that sort of stuff. Certainly, you know, we'd be grateful for any informal feedback we can get from people. This is the first time we've done it on a virtual platform like this. So I think we're all looking forward to unwinding with some good information and feedback from everyone who participated. So, all right, well, look, thanks again, Amy. Thanks again, Dennis. Thanks again to Sophia, you know, out there in the universe somewhere. Thanks for the audience as well. I'll see you all, hopefully at the social session coming up in about 10 minutes, if not tomorrow.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, matey. Okay, bye.
All the best.